Hello, everyone. Hello, and welcome to this episode of Generative AI in Azure Studies series. So, my name is David Okeade, and I have with me here um, Kenny Kilanko. How are you doing, Kenny? How are you doing today?
How are you doing?
Yeah, doing good. Thanks. So, first of all, let's apologize to everyone for starting late today. So there were some technical issues that we had like behind the scenes that we're trying to sort out. So next time we shouldn't start late. But nevertheless, we're here, so we're going to get started. So um, today we're going to start with the series on generative AI in Azure, and we're going to start by laying like some foundation stuff. So the way that this is meant to work, or the way that this will work, is both Kenny and I will be walking through a few information surrounding leveraging or using generative AI in Azure for different use cases. So I come from a cybersecurity background. So whatever I'm doing, I'll make sure that it's going to be infused with my background and my information from my background. And Kenya, like, do you want to introduce yourself and also your background and areas that you're going to be exploring with like people as we go through the series?
Okay, hi everyone. My name is Kendi Pinanko. I am a graduate of international relations who recently transitioned to data analysis and is currently specializing in finance. So, yeah, I think that'll be it.
Nah, nice. Oh, that's really awesome. And it's very interesting because I think like in your degree studies, Kenny, like what did you study like in your degree studies again?
International relations.
So studied international relations. So quick question, like how did you even get started in like this tech world? Because you've been doing some very interesting thing. I can't wait for you to get to show like some of those. But how did you even like get started from someone that studied international relations and now uh, working with tech, working with data analysis? That just curious. What's the quick story behind that?
Okay, for me, I've really always had the interest in gadgets, tech, and all. So, I got started during, in Nigeria, we have this thing called ASU strike, like when school goes on prolonged breaks, and sometimes it takes months before we get back to school. So it was during that period, I was in 2022. I was at home bored and I was not really doing anything. I just let's give tech a try, and this analysis was it for me.
Nice. Oh, that's awesome. That's awesome. Okay. So let's get started with today. So we're going to start by just like laying like some foundation today. So I'll go ahead and I'll share my screen and let's get started. So one of the things that I want to, at least in this particular like foundational aspect, one of the things that I wanted to start out with is when we talk about AI or generative AI, there are so many terms that people confuse like for each other. So maybe what we're going to do is we're going to start by defining certain terms, defining certain information, so that we are all like on the same page, so that everything that we're saying, we're all pulling from a consistent template, so to speak. So there are a few things that comes up whenever we talk about things like generative AI, Kenny, right? So, people talk about generative AI itself. People talk about foundational models. People talk about agents. People talk about agentic. There's so many other like aspects and definitions that people of what like people talk about like this. So maybe we'll start out by making sure that that's like we're all coming like from a consistent template. So like to Kenny, for you, for example, like for your background and what you know, what's your understanding of like what generative AI is? For example, generative AI. how is that different? And there's no right or wrong answer. So just for people to know, the way that Kenny and I may flow like in this service, maybe sort of like, I may have some questions for Kenny, and then like maybe we'll expand our knowledge on that. Kenny may have questions for me at any point, so we expound on that. So like your own understanding of generative AI as the basics, and then we'll go down the list. Make sure that we have like consistent definitions.
Mm, I think for me, generative AI is making use of AI to aid whatever you're doing. Like I don't really have knowledge about it. Just this and this, yeah.
Yeah.
So
So essentially, it's like okay, we're leveraging like AI to do whatever like you're doing. Did I get you? Did I get you right? Did I get you correctly? So like when it comes to like like the thing, so AI is something that has always existed for a very long time, right? So we have like the whole concept of AI. So the whole concept of AI, it's about building intelligent systems or intelligent applications or intelligent applications. And when we say intelligent systems, intelligent applications, what we're referring to is we're referring to systems that mimic um, like human intelligence, right? So, and there's many aspects to that, right? So, systems that have like systems that can reason, for example, right? Systems that can respond the way like a human will respond, whether that's in speech, system that can process visual images and make sense of them and take certain actions based on what the visual image that it's processing. So essentially here you have like systems or computer systems or applications that can mimic human form of intelligence is what we're referring to. Generative AI itself, so AI itself is not new. It's been around for like quite a while. However, the whole interesting thing that came about recently has to do with this aspect, which I'll share my screen now. Because again, we've had like essentially like non-generative artificial intelligence that has existed for quite a while. So that those aspects have existed for quite a while. So we have non-generative models. So Microsoft themselves have a lot of non-generative models. But what happened was that with Google's transformer, with Google's transformer papers that they published a while ago, and OpenAI popularizing that with like Chat GPT. So we have essentially AI models that can create new content. So in the past, what we had is we had AI model that can take in existing content and then make predictions, make classifications, extract existing patterns from whatever data that you're feeding it. But the difference between this is it's going to take all those information that you're feeding it, it's going to extract the patterns from it, but then it's going to generate something new based on what it has learned from those patterns. So that was something that was quite new, right? Because that wasn't something that we had before. Before we can just make predictions, do classifications, extract patterns, but here we're able to create content that some people say that did not exist before, albeit it's using the patterns that it learned from the data that we fed it to generate new content. Does that make a little bit of sense, Kenny?
yes,
In
it
terms
does.
of like what this looks like. Yeah. So it's sort of like so that's like sort of like what made that like really popular in terms of like we had like these generative models. So they can create things. So that's one of the first aspects that I wanted to lay out very clearly here is that there are different categories of AI models that we have these days. So we have the non-generative models that still exist, but we have the new generative models. And even the new generative models, they've evolved like over time. So before it was, we just had like large language models. So large language models, the way that they work is you take like data from the internet, you streamline that data from the internet, and then you use that data from the internet to train the a model. So as you can imagine, the internet has like tons of data, right? Massive amount of data. So the model that we got at the end of that ended up being very large. It's a very large language model. It's learned from multiple patterns from what it's I learned from the data and training data sets that's what's used based on what was on the internet. But then over time, people were able to like distill that into like smaller language models with fewer parameters. But then over time, we had like reasoning models. So we have models like the ones that DeepSeek, came out with. And then over time, like we have like all kinds of like models that can do like reasoning capabilities like these days. So um, that's sort of like the different categories that have started like showing up. And the other thing just to mention is in terms of like the modality. So when we're talking about modality, we're talking about what type of inputs and what type of output can this model process or can it accept. So in the past, it used to be, just purely text, and then we had like, large language models which can process images, and then we have video, and then we have speech, and then we have like multimodal services that can process multiple modalities, can process text, image, video, speech at the same time. So those would be like considered to be multimodal type models. So a good example is like something. So when we're talking about this, so text would be like, let's say GPT 4o, that large language model or GPT-4 can process text. DALI would be an example of a large model that can process images. We have multiple models that can process video. So for speech, we have models like Whisper, which is from OpenAI, that can process speech, which is again a large model. And then we have different models that are like multimodal, so to speak. Does that make a little bit of sense, Kenny?
Yes, it does. Yes, it
Yeah. So also for the audience, if you have any questions, please do put your questions in the chat window. And let's see. Oh, okay. So I can see like we do have like some comments in the chat window. Um, Oh, okay, so Kenny, just for next time, people are saying like your audio is very difficult to hear. So, so I think that's something that we need to fix for next time. So thanks very much for the feedback. So we'll sort that out for next time for Kenny's audio. So, okay, so we understand like what differentiates generative AI from other types or categories of AI. Um, I mentioned a little bit about foundational models. So generative AI is built on foundational models that typically are trained on data sets from the internet. So large data set from the internet, distilled down, and then used to train like these large foundational models. So what about agents, Kenny? So these days we hear a lot around agents. What about agents? Because in this series, some of the things that we're going to try to do is we're going to be working with models, we're going to be building agents. So we're going to be building agentic workflows together. So just to lay like some foundational information. So what about agents? What's your understanding of agents? So when we say agents,
I know that they are sometimes used to generate AI to make them reason. Does not require human input.
awesome. That's an excellent definition. So because what happens is when it comes to like when we talk about like agents, again, all of this with some of the concept that we've talked about is, let's say in the past, like Kenny needs to perform a task. Like let's say Kenny needs to maybe do some cooking, right? You want to make you know some delicacy somehow, right? So you go to use like one of the foundational models that exist. So maybe you're using, let's say, GPT 4o, and then you go to GPT 4o and you give it an input and say, hey, I'm trying to make this delicacy. Let's say it's mixture of jollof rice and fried rice. I'm trying to make this delicacy, help me out. GPT-4o gives you instructions and says, here are the steps. So step number one, you have to get this ingredient. Step number two, you have to take this action. Step number three, you have to take this action. In this case, it's just giving you the instructions. You still have to go carry out those instructions. So when we are talking about agent is where we take things to the next level. So where Kenny can say, give an instruction to the model, and then the model will make a plan for exactly what it's going to do. And then after making the plan, the model is going to start taking certain actions to make that happen. The model is going to start taking certain actions to make that happen. And the model in this case um, would be able to self-correct itself. So maybe if it takes certain actions, it didn't get the result that it expected that it needed to get. It will self-correct itself and go back and reason again and say, okay, I need to adjust this step. I'll adjust it. I'll take another action again. So that's what, like when people say agents, that's what they're referring to. They're referring to the ability or just taking a foundational model or a model and giving it the ability to perform actions without human involvement. And there's a lot of things that's involved in making that happen, Kenny. For example, what that means is that this agent must have access to certain tools for it to be able to take actions. This agent must have access to certain services in order for it to be able to take action, right? So if it's going to be able to take actions, it's not just going to contain knowledge, it's going to have the ability to make a call to use certain tools. So that means we're going to be giving it tools. So one popular tool may be a web search tool. Give the model the ability to search the web. It may be the ability to call certain APIs or trigger certain functions to take an action, right? It may be the ability to make modifications in certain services. So we give it access and the ability to be able to take certain actions in certain services on our behalf. So that is what that's referring to. And a big part of what powers what we call like agents are the reasoning models. The reasoning models are the models that um, are not just like giving us like text outputs, but they're processing the information and they're able to draw up a plan in terms of actions that they're going to take. Does that make a little bit of sense?
Yes, yes.
Yeah. Okay. Okay, so let's go a step further then, and let's talk about like some of these things. So when we talk, generally speaking, when we talk about AI on Azure, the very first thing that people do is people go straight into let us start building our AI applications. Let's start building our AI services. However, one of the key points that I want to start with today is that there are different levels of using AI that Microsoft has to offer when it comes to Azure. The first part is not where we build our own AI applications. The first part is what Microsoft has to offer is we start using AI that's embedded into Microsoft applications. I'll give you examples of that, Kenny. So a good example of that is there's something called the Azure Copilot. Is that something that you've seen or used before, the Azure Copilot? Let me bring that up.
I've seen it before, but
Yeah, go ahead, sorry. Oh, sorry, go ahead with what you were saying, sorry, Kenny.
said I've come across it.
Ah, okay. So, so let me bring up like my screen here very quickly. So here I am like in the Azure portal. And in the top right corner, you have this thing here called Copilot. So this is a Copilot for Azure. If I click on that, so here what you have here is um, AI that's embedded into the Azure portal. And you can also use it outside like the Azure portal. We'll talk about that later. But there are two main things that this thing has access to. This thing has access to Microsoft documentation relating to Azure. It also has access to the customer information via something called the Azure Resource Graph. So it has access to two things that way. So Azure Copilot has access to both Microsoft documentation and it has access to customer data via something called the Azure Resource Graph. So Azure Resource Graph is a service that Copilot can use. So again, like going back to like what we're talking about earlier, like Kenny around like agents. So essentially, Copilot can use Azure Resource Graph to make certain queries to get information about a customer's like Azure data. So example of that. If I go over here and I say, do I have any virtual machine that is running? Now, if I ask it this question, what you're going to see is that Copilot will have to determine where will I get this information from? Will I get this information from Microsoft documentation, or will I get this information from querying the customer's data? Then Copilot will make that determination to say, okay, actually, this looks like information that I'll need to get from the customer's data. Therefore, what I'm going to do is I'm going to make a query to Azure Resource Graph, pull in the necessary information, and then use that to respond to like this question. So if I go ahead and I press enter to that, so you can see here it says determining what to do. And you can see the next one that it's saying here. Can you see that, Kenny? It says trying to query Azure Resource Graph. And there you go. So you can see that what it's done is it's made and it's done like it's written an Azure Resource Graph query to try to solve that challenge. And you can see that it's correctly identified and says, yes, David, you have a virtual machine that's running, and it's giving me a link to that virtual machine, which it is correct because if I go under virtual machines in my account, I actually do have a virtual machine that's running, which is that one right there. That's the only one that's running. But the way that it got to that is it's able to use this tool or this service. So Copilot is able to make use of Azure Resource Graph to get that information. So it's one of the other things just to keep in mind that you see, Kenny. Like when we're talking about like agents and some of this stuff, we said that they have access to different tools, right? That they can use. So another popular tool is the ability is a tool that allows to write code, to generate code. So, for example, when you're speaking to like an agent, again, we'll talk about that in more details later. When you're talking to an agent, you may say something like, 1061 times 5,000. The agent is not going to try to retrieve this information from its training knowledge. Instead, what it's going to do is it's going to say, for this challenge that you're giving to me, I'm going to use this tool to write a code to solve this problem, and then I'll run the code, get the result, and then display the result back to you. So in other words, this is going beyond just information that's contained within the model itself. So we have access to information contained within the model itself. The model itself may be able to use other tools like web search, resource search, API calls, or maybe write code, for example. So just wanted to call some of that out. So that's one use case, Kenny, in terms of being able to use AI embedded into Microsoft applications relating to Azure. Do you know any other example that exists apart from Azure Copilot? Any other example from where Microsoft are beginning to embed AI into like Azure services, Azure processes? Any other one that you are aware of?
I'm can't seem to remember one at the moment.
Yeah. So I'll tell you another one. Another one, Kenny, is this one that was announced just a few weeks ago called the Azure SRE agent. So the Azure SRE agent is another one. So it's currently in preview. So it's not one that you'll be able to access directly without signing up for the preview. So you have to sign up for the preview in order to be able to access it. So, but what this allows us to do, so, like what the SRE means. You know what SRE means, Kenny? I know I'm putting you on the spot. I know, I know, but yeah, but we've known each other for like a while. So you're also going to be putting me on the spot when we are going through like aspects that you cover. So that's sort of like the way that this works. So SRE, you know what SRE means? Anyone in the audience that knows what SRE
Yes.
means, put something in the chat window. SRE. Let me see if somebody's going to put something in the chat window. Otherwise, I'm just going to talk about it, and then we can go on. Anyone knows what SRE is? Put it in the chat window if you know what SRE is. Okay, I can't see like anybody responding to that. So SRE stands for Site Reliability Engineer. So the way that it sort of like works, so to tell you like a little bit of background story to this, Kenny. So like, in the past, like things were much more easier and straightforward. You had developers that develop and write applications, right? You have infrastructure engineers that build infrastructure and manage infrastructure, right? So that was, everyone has like separate roles, like in the past. However, what organizations found out was it's very difficult to be able to troubleshoot certain issues if you don't have a deep understanding of the application, right? It's very difficult to troubleshoot like certain issues if you don't have a deep understanding of the application. So a good illustration of that um, would be, let's say, like maybe a good example of that would be if you don't have like a deeper understanding of how the application is making certain calls, it's going to be very difficult for you to just look on the infrastructure level and try to fix that problem. So what happened was we had a type of role that came up. So the role was called like SREs, Site Reliability Engineers. Essentially, these are people that have expertise in both infrastructure and application development. So that way they can be the bridge between infrastructure teams and application development teams because they have understanding of both worlds, right? And then they can be a bridge for essentially both roles. So essentially, these are people that have deep knowledge of understanding in terms of how to troubleshoot like things at that level. So what Microsoft did was they released this thing called the Azure SRE agent. And Azure SRE agent has the ability, so it's an agent, as the name implies, it's an agent. It has the ability to respond to incidents in Azure. So, for example, let me scroll down this document. So, for example, there's been like an alert that's been raised in your Azure environment. The SRE agent can pick that up, triage that alert. So it's going to use like reasoning capabilities that we're talking about. It's going to look at the alerts, look at the logs, look at the metrics, make a plan and say, okay, I'm going to go make certain calls. So I'm going to go make this call, figure out certain information, make this other call, figure out certain information, and try to deduce a solution from that. So this is different from Azure Copilot. So this is another way that Microsoft is bringing to us in terms of the ability to use AI embedded into Microsoft applications. So what I'm trying to get to here, Kenny, is when we talk about generative AI in Azure, many times we just want to jump into let's build our own agents. And we're going to do that, right? Let's fine-tune our models. Let's build our own agentic workflows. We're going to do all of that. But when we talk about generative AI in Azure, the right place to start is how do we use the options that Microsoft offers us to leverage AI that's embedded into our current workflow. A good place to start is Azure Copilot. Another good place to start is the Azure SRE agent. So those are embedded into applications that we are using in Azure today. We don't need to build anything in order to be able to use them. However, the place that we want to get to in the series is where we are actually able to build our own agent that we can give it certain tasks to do on our behalf, and it can do those tasks on our behalf. And we're going to get to that later. But I think that this is where we're going to be pausing today. If anybody has any question, we'll be happy to answer any questions. I'll put some of this like in the chat window. Let me go ahead and put some of the links that I've shared in the chat window. So, but this is like the first one. And then when are we doing this again, Kenny, for the audience? When is the next session?
In time.
In 2 weeks' time. In 2 weeks' time. So the week after next week. And is it going to be the same time? Is it going to be the same time? Same time, okay. Time. So, and I guess like same time, okay. And I guess like next time we're going to be taking things a little bit further by exploring maybe the Azure SRE agent, and then we'll start introducing the options that we have to build our own agent in Azure. And we're going to get into that. And then you also do have something interesting for us at some point, Kenny. So maybe not the next time, but maybe the time afterwards. So you want to give people a little bit of description of what you're planning? Not right now, okay. You're still cooking it up. Okay. so we'll get to that then. Okay, so any questions that you have, Kenny, from today's study? So today, what we did was we introduced like certain foundational like definitions so that we're all on the same page in terms of what generative AI is, ability to generate new content and not just predict or classify based on existing patterns. It's actually generating something new. Talked about like the different categories of models. We have foundational models where we can have large language models, which are trained on data typically from the internet. We have small language models, and we have reasoning models, which again we know from like DeepSeek and from GPT O3. It's another reasoning model from OpenAI. We talk about agents, which allows these models to be able to take actions on our behalf, not just give us instructions. So the agents essentially is like the next level of AI assistant. AI assistant level 1 is you're able to have conversation. AI assistant level 2 is you're able to delegate actions to it. And you're able to delegate actions to it. We're talking about agents. It has access to tools. It has access to services. We talked about when we are talking about generative AI in Azure, many times we want to jump into building our own agents, which we're going to get into that. But the first place to start is how do we use AI that's embedded into existing applications in Azure. So, and we gave 2 examples here. We talked about Azure Copilot, which has access to Microsoft documentation and customer data via Azure Resource Graph. And finally, we've got Azure SRE agent. So do you have any questions? Again, Kenny, do you have any questions for me? If you don't have questions for me, I may have a question for you. Okay, you don't have a question for me, I have a question for you. So here's my question for you, Kenny. Kenny's like, oh no, yeah, I've got questions. That's the way this series is going to work. We're going to be asking each other random questions. That's how we learn. It's a study series anyways. So here's my question, Kenny. Can Azure Copilot take actions on my behalf? So for example, you saw me ask you the question about, do I have any virtual machine that's running? And it says, yeah, you have a virtual machine that's running. So what do you think will happen, Kenny? Can I tell it and say, shut down that virtual machine? What do you think will happen? Do you think you would do it? You think you would do that? Okay, so maybe others want to put your answer in the chat window also. So what do you think will happen if I tell Azure Copilot to shut down this single running virtual machine that I have? Put your answer in the chat window if you're following along. Do you think it will do it, or do you think it will say no? So let us get ready. stop the running virtual machine called Linux VM. So I'm not seeing anything in the chat window. So put something in the chat window. What do you think? Do you think it's going to accept this instruction and stop this virtual machine? So this is the moment of truth, Kenny. This is the moment of truth. Stop the running virtual machine called Linux VM. Let's see. So it's determining what to do. Let's see. It says it's fetching certain commands. It's determining what to do again. So it's going back to vision and make some plans. Oh, I can see Jabulani here. After I've entered, so that's like no. So so after I've entered like the instruction, then you come and say it will give you the command. So actually, so let me see that. So the answer to that is yes, it will. So Jabulani says it will give me the command. In the past, that's what it will do, Kenny. So in the past, it will give you the command, but it will actually do that for you. But here you see that in this case, this is operating like an agent because now it says, because here's what you see when we get into agents is that when an agent is taking actions, especially when the action can be sensitive, you always want to prompt a human in the loop to review. So because you can imagine, Kenny, when we start talking about building agents, you're talking about, you're going to be looking at things from a data analyst, financial data analyst perspective. So imagine you're talking about move 1 million naira from this account to the other account. You're like, okay, before you start taking these actions, I want you to confirm with a human whether they should proceed. So that's a human in the loop workflow. So instead of being fully automated, yeah, it's automated, but you have a human in the loop. So that's what this is doing now. So it will actually take the action for me. I can go ahead and I can say stop, and it will actually execute that command on my behalf. So this is truly an AI agent. It is not just something that will give me the commands to go do. That's what it did in the past. Now it's an actual agent that will actually take that action on my behalf. And the reason why I bring this up, by the way, Kenny, the reason why I bring this up is to show you how rapidly things evolve in this space. Because as what Jabulani mentioned in the past, what it will do is that it will give you the command, but not run it for you. But that has changed. Now it can take actions on your behalf. Okay, so we're going to stop there for today. So join us again next 2 weeks where we continue with our study series on generative AI in Azure. And we're going to take things a little bit further. We'll look at the Azure SRE agents, then we start looking at how we can start building our own agents and implementing agentic workflows. But in the meantime, any final words that you want to say, Kenny, before we call it a day today?
No, nothing.
Okay, thanks very much, everyone, for joining us, and see you next time. Have a lovely rest of the day, afternoon, evening. Bye for now.